some more creepypastas. So for this one, we're going to be reading Slenderman, which I'm sure everybody knows who Slenderman is, and if you don't, I don't know where the hell you have been. But Slenderman is very popular. He's just as popular as fucking all the other creepypastas I read, so like Jeff the Killer, The Rake, and all that good stuff. So, yeah, we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. The reading time is 16 minutes, so yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm also sorry for all the fucking ads you see. There's nothing I can do about that to turn those off, so. If only you hadn't looked back. Through it was the autumn day and had seemed long, and the brief walk towards home was short. As the sunlight began to fade, you and your two friends left the playground behind and trudged reluctantly back home, knowing that you would be forced to pick up the games and conversations the next day. The next day, that never came. If only you hadn't looked back. But you had. Turning just for a moment, you would glance back towards the tree line, seeing the fingers of their branches clawing up towards the sky, and beside them, the figure. At first, you thought you must have been mistaken, that your eyes in the hazy blur of twilight were playing tricks on you. But no. When you looked again, he was still there. Taller than any man could be, thinner than the willowy branches that extended ever upward from the trees. He loomed in the distance like the shadow of some horrible dark truth, and you know instantly that you had to look away. That if you didn't tear your eyes from the from that blank, featureless face, that then soon the blank would wash over you, become you, and you would walk slowly but surely, as if pulled by some magnetic force towards him. Toward him, though you feared him. Though you were scared of this unnatural height, the aching, blank whiteness of his face, and the arms that seemed stretched towards you, and the slithering tentacles behind. You turned, screwing your eyes, telling and willing yourself not to look and not to see and not to give in and go to him. You screamed to the others, telling them the same, telling them not to look. But you opened your eyes and you realized they had already looked, and they were already gone. Possibly the most famous creepypasta character of all time, and certainly one of the most frequent ones into the mainstream media, the Slender Man, also known as Slenderman, is a character born of a variety of earlier influences, but which itself represents an evolution and uses the development of folklore. Oh, Lord have mercy. Sorry, I didn't know where this was going. Okay. I guess we'll just read on and see where it goes. Violent real-life events linked to the Slenderman character increased its infirmity and even led to a moral panic based around the possible negative influences and danger that a functional character possessed to children. So, is this the actual story? Lord have mercy. Okay. I guess we'll just read it. I don't know. Okay, whatever. So here's table of contents. There's so many fucking... Okay. Though the adaptation and modification by various authors means that Slenderman's appearance can vary somewhat depending upon the source, and the most common feature remain the same. The character is usually deceived by an abnormally tall humanoid, usually wearing a dark suit and tie. Slenderman's face is almost always completely featureless and often either white or pale gray, though in some depictions his blank face does feature an animalistic mouth. Slenderman is often said to have able to extend or stretch his limbs, particularly his arms, at will, and either has tentacles protruding just visible from his back, or tentacle-like appendages in place of his arms. The character commonly inhabits liminal spaces such as the entrance to woods and forests or areas of abandoned ground of the outskirts of more populated areas. God, I can't read for shit right now, Jesus. Also, there are a wide variety of Slenderman stories out there. Much of this character's effectiveness come from the fact that there are no single definitive version, and the initial post that introduced the character being only a fragment quotes linked to an image rather than actual story or complete narrative. Much like his appearance, however, though the details alter some elements seem to remain as constants, such as character appearing by woods or forest, enticing children away from their parents and friends to never be seen again. Another common trope is that Slenderman exerts an influence upon the victims, making them perpetrators of crimes or violent actions, and the character that is also said to cause an illness, particularly a cough known as slender sickness, to induce those to encounter him to suicide. These latter features, namely incitement to violence or suicide, became more prevalent and commonly associated with the character in a case of art intimidating life after real-life violent events, or cases of attempted suicide were linked to the character. The origins. Despite some media outlets adding to the aura of Slenderman mythos by claiming that the figure's origins are unclear, it's the fact that the character's origin is so easily traceable. Slenderman is the original form was created by Eric Knudsen under the alias Victor Surge. Knudsen was responding to a call on Something Awful for posters to contribute digitally altered photographs that would then serve as the basis for new mythologies or stories. Knudsen's efforts posted on June 10, 2009, which showed a group of teenagers and children with the now familiar figure of Slenderman standing in the background. At first glance, the images seemed normal, but the figure's abnormalist size and featureless face, once noticed, gave the picture an eerie and unsettling feeling. Shit. Alongside the image, Knudsen provides small snippets of out-of-context text purported to be witnessed accounts that give him hints about the scenes depicted and their relation to the anomalous figure of the Slender Man. By attaching short snippets of text with the images, Knudsen transformed the lone image to the first Slender Man story. Albeit in non-linear and fragmentary form, following the initial appearance, the Slender Man character was then picked up by other users who either fit him into their own narratives or wrote short accounts of alleged encounters with the character, sculpting as if they did some of the features recognized today. With each new detail and new account, posters helped in the building of mythos around the character that, because of its viral scope and myriad of conflicting details and accounts, did not refrain from a canon version of what process happened fast. The day after Knudsen's post, a user named LeechCode5 posted a photo with a backstory featuring Slenderman. By 14th June, a user named Trenchmall had used Slenderman in his own story. A user known as Thorio Up posted a story about a figure in Germany who stalked children on the edge of the forest, providing an invented historical reference point for the character. On June 20th of the same year, Slenderman became the subject of a YouTube video series based upon an earlier Something Awful post by user Troy Ragnar. The series, which alleged to detail interaction or discoveries about Slenderman made whilst working on a film project named Marble Hornets. The series of videos was supported by a Twitter feed, and the second YouTube channel allowed the character to move from being a text, image, and form-based phenomenon to being an RPG, ARG, with the character now being referred to, discussed and modified across a number of different platforms and modalities by ever-growing number by contributors. So here's the original story. After waking up with a jolt, the girl had laid in bed for a few seconds longer. Reaching over to switch on her bedside lamp, she tried to remember exactly what had stolen her from her sweet slumber away. When she couldn't, the brunette swung her legs to the side of the bed and heaved herself up, checking the time on her phone, and she snorted when she saw it was midnight, the witching hour. Knowing that sleep would only evade her, she left her bedroom for the kitchen, a good cup of coffee on her mind. As she passed by the front door, a chill spread like liquid fire down her spine. It's only winter, she told herself, focusing again on the coffee plant. Measuring out scoops, water, and preparing her cup kept her occupied, but as the dark liquid boiled, she had nothing left to keep her mind from wandering off. The chill returned, and she couldn't help but glance behind her to the front door. It stood there innocently enough, just like always. The deadbolt was still in place, and she could see nothing amiss with it. Turning back to her coffee, she did her best to forget about the feeling. With the cup in her hand, she started back towards her bedroom. As she walked by the front door, she decided that a quick glance out the peephole would help calm her restless mind. The chill worsened with each step she took towards the door and further away from the safety and warmth of her blankets. She pressed her empty hand against the cold metal door and took a deep breath before leading her eye to the peephole. At first she could only see an inky blackness and somehow seemed to swirl in itself. When she blinked in surprise, the void melted away. She wished it hadn't. In its place there stood what she could only guess was once a man. The limbs were long and inhumanly awkward, with bolting joints branching off into several arms, and not unlike the branches of a tree. The creature was draped in a black suit, somehow making the thing more nightmarish to her. The icing of proverbial cake on the proverbial cake, however, was passed as the hellish thing's face. It was as though her mind blurred the ghastly visage as spare itself further in shock and horror. She shoved herself away from the door with a hand still pressed against it. The scalding mug of coffee fell, and the liquid burning her bare legs as she fell backwards, trying to crawl away from the door. She knew somehow that her mind had it playing tricks on her. As she crouched back away from the door, she had watched as the tendrils as the black as a void she first saw snake around through the cracks. The girl was trapped between the instincts to flee and the gut feeling of not wanting to turn her back on the door. When the door jolted, the urge to flee came over her, and she slipped in the burning liquid as she tried to make it back to her room. She knew deep down that she was trapped herself in a corner, but she had to get away from the door. The girl was halfway down the hall when she heard the previous locked door creak open. She screamed and slipped into a wall, cracking her chin on it and stunning her. After that, there was only blackness. "Nicole?" A warm male voice snapped the woman out of her trance. As she turned around, she was met by one of her sister's doctors. She nodded, not sure if she should say anything or if she could find her voice if she did have to say something. That morning, she had gotten the urgent phone call from the hospital saying that her sister Lindsay was there. Before they even had let her see her, the doctors had pulled her off to the side and insisted that they talk to her about what might have happened. Phrases like self-inflicted and assault had been thrown around, and Nicole felt her mind reel. She still hadn't fully understood what they had been saying until she saw Lindsay with her own eyes. Her little sister had a bandage wrapped around her head, covering both of her ears as well as her eyes. They said it was to keep her now deadened eyes from drying out, to keep the infection out of the wounds. Lindsay had made to her ears. The doctors had guessed that either she or someone had jammed a pencil into them to keep her off balance, or to deafen herself against something. There's a mix of first and second degree burns to her hands, legs, and feet, and what had assumed to be coffee by her neighbors found slipped all over the entry of her apartment. As Nicole walked into her sister's hospital room, for the first time, she thought she had spied the silhouette of a man in the window. That she knew was impossible. Her sister's room was on the third story of the hospital. Yikes. That shit's creepy. So here's the behavior. Much of the fascination with Slenderman is rooted in all over the aura of the mystery that he's wrapped in. Despite the fact that it is rumored he kills children almost exclusively, it's difficult to say whether or not his only objective is to slaughter. Oftentimes it's either reported or recorded that he can be found in sections of the woods, and these generally tend to be suburban. He's also been reported to be seen with large groups of children, as many photographs portray. It's commonly thought that he resides in the woods and forests to prey on children, and he seems to be unconcerned with being exposed in daylight or captured in photos. It is often not thought that, as well as he enjoys stalking people who become overly paranoid about his existence, purposefully giving them glances of himself in order to further frighten them. For this reason, it seems like Slenderman very much enjoys psychologically torturing his victims. He also appears often to float or drift around rather than walk, which suggests the possibility of him being an ethereal being rather than a creature or a man. This would also explain why he is able to remain mobile in spite of his poorly proportioned body. Even though Slender Man was fabricated of something awful forms, some people have already claimed sightings. He is mostly seen at night peering into open windows and walks out into front of lone motorists on secluded roads. His main intentions appear to be kidnapping children, as when he sees near them in photographs, they usually disappear shortly afterwards. The Slenderman also inspired many stories such as those of marble hornets. In the end, though, his purpose remains unknown. An interesting take on Slenderman by a Possum member who is writing on the Marble Hornet series for evidence and facts. There has been a main misconception about my pal, the Slenderman, due to the appearance of this article. He does not have hair or a face. Everything else is correct. There is some questioning as to whether or not he is more than more than one. I find that unlikely. It is most likely that Slendy fucking with your head in order to make you think that there's more than one, which he has been known to do. As of now, Slendy has 3 or 4 known compliances, and those are Hoodie, Masky, and the Rake, and possibly the Observer. Not much is known about yet. Not much is known yet because the episode of Noah Maxwell ARG has not been released in the Marble Hornets ARG. Hoodie and Masky are possibly his followers. In the Everyman Hybrids ARG, the Rake seems to be working with him, but aren't really sure if that's true or not. Slenderman historical references. Brazilian cave paintings. Wow, they really gone in depth with this shit, huh? The earliest argued reference to legend is within the cave paintings found in Serra da Capiva National Park of northeastern of Brazil, which are believed to be dated back from far back as 9000 BC. These paintings are strangely show us elongated character leading a child by hand, but make no reference to the extra appendages. Egyptian hieroglyphs. The next known possible reference to the Slender Man comes from around 3100 BC in Lower Egypt, with a reference to the Thief of Gods or the Thief of Kuk. Becoming commonplace during the reign of Pharaoh Wasner, hieroglyphic paintings represent the thief. They were found in Pharaoh's tomb, who is rumored to have some kind of encounter with the entity. The carvings resemble a strange figure with multiple upper limbs, one that has never been found in any other hieroglyphic language. The German woodcuts. Interesting. Renowned German woodcutter Hans Freckenberg created the last 2 woodcuts featuring a character he describes as Der Ritter, the Knight, during the mid-16th century that were discovered in Halstelberg Castle in 1883. When Freckenberg was known for his realistic depiction of human anatomy, something that was unusual among woodcutters of the time, these pictures were featured a skeletal, multi-limbed character. Historians are unsure of the exact symbolic nature of the creature, with some claiming that it was a personification of the religious war that raged in Europe at the time, while others say it represented the mysterious plagues that have been believed to be the reason for the mysterious abandoning of the Hasselberg Castle in the nearby village in 1543. However, many insist that Frankenberg was attempting to represent Der Groben, the tall man. According to the legend, he was a fairy who lived in the Black Forest. Bad children who crept into the woods at night would be relentlessly chased by Der Groben, who wouldn't leave them until he either caught them or were forced to tell them their parents of their wrongdoings. Even then, there's a chilling account from an old journal dating from 1702. My child, my Lars, he's gone, taken from his bed. The only thing we found was a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but it's softer, thicker. Lars came to my bedroom yesterday screaming at the top of his lungs that the angel's outside. I asked him what he talked about, and he told me some nonsense fairy about their goatmen. He said he went to the groves by our village and found one of my cows dead, hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it at first, but now he is gone. We must find Lars, and my family must leave before we are killed. I am so sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me. What are we at right now? 18 minutes? Okay. Romanian mythology. There's also a Romanian fairy tale in which tells a legend of a tall man, featuring the description which may have been taken to refer the Slender Man. The tall man stood in a clearing dressed as nobleman on all black. Shadows lay over him, dark as cloudy midnight. He had many arms and legs, all long and boneless, as snakes, as sharp as swords, and they withered like worms on nails. He did not speak, but he made intentions known. In the fairy tale, the tall man curses a mother to kill her husband and child before he slid it from a fireplace and clenched her in the burning embrace. In the English mythology, there's also an English myth referred to as Tree Man, who is said to have a slim body with appendages that look like tree branches. He is only to be known seen in the woods and used as a story that parents told their children to thwart bad behavior. There have been quite a few disappearances of children that have been said to be linked to the Tree Man. There's also a movie, which I think I've seen, and it was god-awful. Folklore and Faceless Fiends. Far from being simply a flash-in-the-pan internet meme, Slenderman and particularly the way in the character grew within the public consciousness, has been the subject of serious academic investigation within the world of folklore studies, with scholars pointing out that the aspects of collectivity, viability, and performance in the development and spread of Slenderman's story identified it's a true piece of folklore. The egalitarian way in which a character was constructed, his attributes, characteristics, and intentions being argued about, that discussed by a range of different contributors, and the fact that the details might change depending upon who is telling the tale and whom is fascinated with the folklorists. Some of whom may have argued that the development of Slenderman is the way that demonstrates a new stage of evolution and of folklore as a whole. The argument basically goes to prior to the invention of printed word, folklore was spread by word of mouth. The basic outline of the story remained the same, but since the story was being retold on different occasions with the attention given to the audience preferences, details and some aspects of the story would change. Once everything was printed, accepted versions came into being because the story could be codified. With the freedom, anonymity, and multiplicity afforded by the internet, the rigid structure is now breaking down, and the original features of folklore, where things can be changed, details vary, and specifics become blurry after returning. The Slenderman and the way the character developed are a prime example of this. Interestingly, the collaborative development also contributes to the effectiveness of the character and fits perfectly with the fact that he is described as faceless. By not having defined or recognizable features, Slenderman remains formless and also entirely. By not having definable or recognizable features, Slenderman remains formlessly and also entirely malleable, in the same way the universal bogeyman does. A creature known to be a threat by all, but upon which anyone can project their own fears. Some scholars also have pointed out how the features that did develop to define the Slenderman's characteristics have their roots in much older folklore. For example, the character status as a malevolent force dwelling into the forest or woods and threatening harm to children has massive echoes on the traditional big bad wolf narratives or fairy tales of the Headless Horseman, while the vagueness of his appearance and intentions and proclivity for kidnapping children links him to the fairies and fae folk, a link that has been explored by nodes of scholar in folklore. The kidnapping element also ties a Slenderman character upon other mythic bagmen to known carry off children, such as the European tradition of the bagman who would take children away. The story surrounding Slenderman and his ability seemingly enticed children to come to him, rather than offering them violence, at least in any form that is explicitly described in the stories, as heavy echoes of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The mythic figure who has the ability to induce rodent to follow him using a pipe was therefore able to drive them out of Hamelin and was double-crossed by the people of the city who refused to pay him. As punishment, he used the same pipe to magical ability of the children of the city, leading them to follow him out of the city in a mesmerized possession. It has been pointing out that outside of the internet, the Slenderman retains power to concern and worry parents because he represents the classic notion of something that is a threat to children and cannot be fully explained or defined again to this party due to Slenderman's inherent vagueness, in most that could not pin down his origins to an example of a particular television show or game. He instead seems to concern parents to have been conjured from nothing, and yet a character that is known to be amongst children and teenagers. The idea that the character reported to be entice children and adolescents within the story is so enticing and popular with them in the real world is a blurring of boundaries that parents found threatening, especially when Slenderman's influence was seemed to have extended beyond the internet and into real life. Real life and more panic. In 2012, a girl in Wisconsin was stabbed 19 times by two classmates who then attributed their actions into being the service of trying to meet a demand laid down by Slenderman. Whilst one of the perpetrators also claimed to have spoken to Ninja Turtles and characters from Harry Potter series, it was a reference to the ominous-sounding Slenderman that caught the public's imagination. Particularly as this was something that was more tech-savvy, younger generations seemed to be aware of, and which their parents were in the dark about. With the police chief where the stabbings occurred, adding to the scene of trepidation by commenting that the internet is full of dark and wicked things. Following an incident of moral panic arose from the United States, and parents and teachers voicing their concern about the possible negative influence of this Slenderman. These concerns were further driven to a frenzy by incidents in 2014 and 15 which were linked to the Slenderman mythology. In 2014, an incident a young girl was allegedly to have set fire to her home in Florida with her mother and sibling inside, and what the media reports later pointed out, amongst other things, the girl had been reading stories of the Slenderman. In 2015, the incident, a spate of attempted suicides among certain people on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, was linked back to a character who was cited to be an influence. The involvement of supernatural forces of the suicide epidemic was underlined when a high-ranking official from Oglala Sioux tribe mentioned a brief in the suicide spirit. Conversely, it is interesting to note that the Slenderman entered the mainstream media and became linked to all these real-life incidents, and the character's popularity online showed significant signs of warning with a massive dip of the popularity and rated output. It is also significantly that it was in the wake of these real-life incidents that the depictions of Slenderman as benevolent or protecting figure first began to emerge. So, and the last one is influences. The fact that the Slenderman character mythology was constructed by a disparate collection of creators over an extended period of time means that pinning down individual influences that may have contributed to the character's construction can be difficult. However, it is possible to trace some figure tropes and characteristics that almost identically helped to shape the figure into Slenderman. Amongst the influences that Knudsen had acknowledged are Stephen King, the figure of Tall Man in horror movie Phantasm, the work of H.P. Lovecraft, and the Mad Gazer of Matum. One of the most immediately obvious influences, not to mention by author, are the Men in Black characters that populate many sci-fi television programs and have one incarnation of the Matrix films. Usually these figures are thought to represent some shadowy government agency rather than being cryptid or malevolent entities in their own rights, but the dark suits is definitely reminiscent. A spin-off of the theme, another possible influence of the characters of the Gentleman from Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Hush, who, though they do not sport facial features unlike the Slenderman, are malevolent beings with pale skin, bald heads, and dark suits who bear striking resemblance to the description of the Slenderman. Other suggested influences upon the character's later development are Jack Skellington from Nightmare Before Christmas, who again sports a bald, pale head, and is himself incredibly thin and wears a dark suit. And finally, one of the most compelling influences in the DC Comics is character The Question. The character, as well as wearing a suit and has entirely featureless face, and bears an uncanny resemblance to many of the Slenderman, and depictions seen in fan art. Whilst the existence of this character is strikingly similarity in appearance, does not necessarily mean that it is a direct influence upon the image of Slenderman or was ever known to the character's creator. It's interesting that Knudsen originally posted as Victor Surge, whilst in DC Comics the Question's secret identity is Victor Sage. Jeff the Killer versus Slenderman. That's an actual story too. God, it better be. So, oof. I'm not exactly sure where that went. I thought it was just going to be a story like all my other ones. But it's actually pretty cool to read this now that I read it, because I didn't know that it was such like a big thing. Like, I knew about some of the shit that happened in IRL, like the girl that sacrificed her friends, those two girls that sacrificed their friend to fucking Slenderman or whatever. But about like all of the historical references, I didn't know anything about that, which is actually pretty cool. I'm also sorry that I read kind of fast there and kind of like off key. This was more kind of like a research point instead of like an actual story, and this also can only handle 30 minutes of recording because I use it for free and I don't pay for it, so that's why. So I better end it now before it all gets weird. It cuts off. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. If you like this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, give you the thumbs up, also the bell, so you notify me videos. So sorry. Notify when I make videos. Other guys, and I will say